Coming up, the Kevin Durant blockbuster headlines, a day full of last-minute moves. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You are listening to a very special edition of Locked On Game to Game NBA as we go over the trade deadline. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. The NBA trade deadline day on Thursday kicked off with a huge bang because that Kevin Durant blockbuster deal came together while everybody was sleeping overnight on Wednesday. Locked On Nets breaks down the fire sale for Brooklyn and the end of an era.
And just like that, the championship era in Brooklyn came to an abrupt and disappointing end. I'm Adam Arbuck with the Locked On Nets podcast, and in the wee hours of the trade deadline morning, the Brooklyn Nets made their second franchise-altering move, this time, though, sending the crown jewel, Kevin Durant, out the door on his way to the Phoenix Suns. Now, in exchange for the superstar talent, the Brooklyn Nets are getting back quite a haul. First-round picks in 2023, 25, 27, and 29, in addition to a 2028 pick swap. They'll also be gaining Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and Jae Crowder. Along for the ride with Kevin Durant to Arizona is TJ Warren, and it's already been speculated that the Brooklyn Nets will be looking for a trade partner to ultimately move Jae Crowder ahead of the 3 p.m. deadline. Now, in the wake of this franchise-altering news, I can certainly sit here and tell you that Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Thomas, Nick Claxton, Mikal Bridges, and Cam Johnson can be a great new nucleus with a bright future ahead in Brooklyn. But ultimately, this is about one of the most disappointing runs for a franchise that had the highest of championship aspirations. To show for it, one playoff victory, a lot of picks, some young players, and right now in this moment, no more superstars. Be sure to be plugged into the Locked On Nets podcast. We'll be breaking down all the latest trade news around these Brooklyn Nets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.
There were a lot of moving parts in that KD deal. One of them includes veteran wing Jae Crowder, who's going to end up in Milwaukee at the end of the day. Locked On Bucks weighs in on this move.
After months of speculation, the Bucks finally get their man. Jae Crowder is coming to Milwaukee. My name's Kane Pittman. I'm the host of the Locked On Bucks podcast. Jae Crowder, also a former Marquette man, so he is familiar with the area. Comes to Milwaukee as they make their push for a title. George Hill, Serge Ibaka, Jordan Nwora on the way out, along with 5 second-round picks. Now, that is a lot. But across the league at the deadline, we saw second-round picks getting thrown around like they're nothing. So overall, a pretty good deal for the Bucks. It gives them defensive versatility. Remember, they might be on a collision course for a series with the Boston Celtics, and you can't get enough defensive wings that can go up against a guy like Jason Tatum and also Jaylen Brown. Last year, they did not have Chris Middleton, they didn't have Joe Ingles, and they didn't have Jae Crowder. So that's a little bit of added size for this team in a potential matchup with the Boston Celtics. We're going to break down this trade, including 2 open roster spots for the Bucks now as a result on Locked On Bucks, wherever you get your podcast. Join us.
The Lakers switching up absolutely everything as well as they send Westbrook out of town in a multi-team, multiplayer deal. Locked On Lakers goes over the return of D'Angelo Russell and the hopes of this move sparking a second-half push.
This is Andy Kamenetsky, co-host of Locked On Lakers podcast, and the Lakers make a big trade ahead of the deadline. They send out Russell Westbrook, Juan Toscano-Anderson, Damian Jones, and a lightly protected first-round pick to the Utah Jazz as part of a 3-way deal. Former second overall pick of their own, D'Angelo Russell, comes back from the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Lakers will also be getting Jared Vanderbilt and Malik Beasley from the Jazz in a deal that helps the Lakers on a lot of fronts. It gives them more outside shooting. It gives them a perimeter defender in Jared Vanderbilt. In D'Angelo Russell, you get scoring, playmaking, a legitimate third option. And for a team that has been oddly flat and disjointed and rudderless since the return of Anthony Davis, frankly, I think it gives this team a jolt of energy that they needed. I think it gives them a sense of purpose to try to get themselves into the play-in mix, into the playoff mix, and just a reason to keep going with all of this. Something needed to change if the Lakers were going to try to make something happen this season, and this trade is it. A lot more to get into, so make sure you are subscribed to the Locked On Lakers YouTube channel and that you make Locked On Lakers your first listen wherever you get your podcasts.
LA also got some roster additions from Orlando as the Magic try to clear some cap space moving forward. Locked On Magic is in to go over that deal and a projected buyout for Patrick Beverley.
This is Philip Rossman-Reich, the host of Locked On Magic, as the Orlando Magic make a deal that I think we all expected to be made. It was something that we actually saw on the horizon for a while now, a deal that's been pitched around, and sometimes the most obvious answer is the obvious one. The Orlando Magic are trading Mo Bamba to the Los Angeles Lakers for Pat Beverley, as well as a second-round pick. Now, honestly, I thought this was Terrence Ross at the beginning because the Lakers certainly do still need some shooting. They also need a big man. So the Orlando Magic get off Mo Bamba, who's been out of the rotation for a good chunk of the season now that Mo Wagner's back, now that Wendell Carter's back, and gives them a veteran point guard, although I suspect that the Magic will buy out Pat Beverley. They'll just take that second-round pick and eventually maybe even promote Kevon Harris from a two-way contract to a full-time contract to give them that tough-minded guard that Pat Beverley is for this team. Beverley obviously would help a winning team a lot more than he might help the Magic, so this feels like an economic trade, one that opens up a ton of cap room, $10 million for the Magic this offseason.
A busy day for the Clippers as they load up for a playoff run. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA. Today's edition of Locked On Game to Game is brought to you by Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill. This is the app that shows you all of your subscriptions in one place and cancels what you don't want for you. So you can cancel unnecessary subscriptions with Rocket Money today. Just go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Seriously, it could save you hundreds per year. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Welcome back to Locked On Game to Game NBA. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you once again for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. The Clippers, along with most every other team in the West, definitely preparing for a daunting postseason. Locked On Clippers loving the moves and happy to see their team is getting in on the action.
Trades. The LA Clippers were active at the trade deadline, and they did exactly what I wanted. I can't believe it. The Clippers finally have a backup big man, and guess what? He was a starting center this year. Mason Plumlee coming to LA, the guy who was the starting center of the 2016 Blazers that knocked the Clippers out. Still serviceable, can get rebounds, can pass the ball. Oh, man, what a great move at the expense of Reggie Jackson, who I've been saying needs to get traded, but I have so much to say about Reggie and his tenure with the Clippers. Also, John Wall going to Houston. Eric Gordon, an original Clipper drafted by the franchise in 2008, is coming back. And maybe the toughest loss, though, for the Clips in this one, Luke Kennard being traded to Memphis. Clippers trading 2 second-round picks to the Denver Nuggets for Bones Highland. Young, exciting scorer. Going to be talking about all these moves on Locked On Clippers.
Memphis was not super involved on Thursday, but they did have an addition as Luke Kennard is a part of a 3-team deal swap with the Clippers and the Rockets. Locked On Grizzlies has more on what this addition will do for the roster.
The Memphis Grizzlies made a trade. Hooray! We're all so excited. And it's for a player that should help with a pretty drastic need as the trade deadline approaches and the unofficial second half of the season gets underway. I'm Joe Molinex of Locked On Grizzlies, and Luke Kennard of the Los Angeles Clippers is making his way to Memphis as part of a 3-team deal. The player that is on their way out of the Grizzlies franchise is Danny Green. 3 second-round picks will also be accompanying Mr. Green. Green's heading to Houston as part of the 3-team trade. All things being worked out as we speak. The exciting thing about this trade for Memphis is Luke Kennard is one of the very best three-point shooters in the entire NBA. Over the last 3,800 minutes played per cleaning the glass, he is among the very best shooters in the league at 45% from the field. He has questions about his defense. Is he just a standstill shooter? Who cares? When Ja Morant is on your team, there's going to be open shots from the perimeter. Luke Kennard can knock them down. This is a big win for the Grizzlies, although they will miss Danny Green's veteran presence.
The Pelicans picked up Josh Richardson from the Spurs for Devontae Graham and 4 second-round picks. It's not the flashiest of moves, but Locked On Pelicans explains how it's going to help New Orleans in the long term.
We're getting close to the end of the NBA's trade deadline, and the Pelicans have made a move, shipping out Devontae Graham along with 4 second-round picks to the San Antonio Spurs in exchange for Josh Richardson. Is this the big move that the Pelicans were hoping to make, that Pelicans fans were hoping to make? And the answer to that is no. This is a cost-saving move. I could tell you all about Josh Richardson. 6'4", two-guard, better size, a little bit better defensively overall than Devontae Graham, averaging 11.5 points per game this season on 35.7% shooting on decent volume. But this is more about his contract. Josh Richardson is an expiring deal. He will not be on the books next year. And if you've watched Locked On Pelicans for any period of time, you know that I've been saying the Pelicans books are not in a great spot next year. $7 million in the luxury tax before this deal. All of a sudden, this trade gets them about $6 million under the luxury tax. This was about saving money and planning long term. If you're looking for a positive to this, this allows them to re-sign guys like Najee Marshall, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy easier in the future, gives them more room to retain those guys, but it is not about trying to win an NBA championship this season. This is a long-term play, and unfortunately something often that small market teams have to do, and there's even more impacts than that, but we'll get into that in tonight's episode of Locked On Pelicans, so stay tuned for that show coming soon wherever you get your podcast and available on YouTube.
A lot of talk, but not a lot of action from the Raptors. OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, they're staying put. Locked on Raptors goes over a rather uneventful day for Toronto.
Seller Schmeller, Sean Woodley here from Locked On Raptors to react to the Toronto Raptors doing nothing that was expected of them at the NBA trade deadline. Of course, late last night before the Kevin Durant bomb, Jakob Poeltl was announced as the latest Raptors acquisition in exchange for Khem Birch, a 2024 top 6 protected first-round pick, and a pair of second-rounders. And then all day long, we were sitting around waiting for the other shoe to drop. Are they going to trade OG Anunoby? Are they going to flip Fred VanVleet or Gary Trent Jr.? Maybe all three. 3 p.m. passes, and none of those guys have left the Toronto Raptors. And this opens up a whole lot of questions. Of course, the Raptors are 26-30. It's been a very disappointing season, but you can kind of see the logic to what the Raptors are doing here. Jakob Poeltl is a center, which is something the Raptors notably have not had in a lot of supply over the last few years. And the thinking must be here, you put in Jakob Poeltl, who is a good rim protector, who can clean up a lot of the messes the Raptors' very aggressive defense creates almost by design, and maybe, just maybe, you can fix the issues that have plagued the Raptors all season long. They've quietly been about a top 10 offense since January the 1st. It's their defense where they've really been losing a step, and Jakob Poeltl could solidify that. It does, of course, introduce 3 potential free agents the Raptors are going to have to worry about in the offseason, and Trent, VanVleet, and Poeltl. I would guess they'll probably try to sign and trade one of them and bring back 2 of them. Maybe they bring back all 3. It's very complex, and Raptors fans are surely upset at the seeming push for the play-in as opposed to dropping down in the standings. But 26 games of Jakob Poeltl with this Raptors core, which, by the way, the bones of this whole team just won 48 games a year ago. I do think it's a reasonable bet that things can stabilize here with Jakob Poeltl, and maybe the Raptors don't seem like this adrift team like they've felt like so far this year. I'll have more broken down on Locked On Raptors. Be sure to tune in.
That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Game to Game NBA. Thank you again for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. Make sure that you are subscribed to Locked On NBA and your favorite team's Locked On podcast for all of those NBA trade deadline updates and more on the second half of the season. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.